during the Spanish-American War, and he was a spy for America. He posed as a tourist, an English tourist person, and he went and spied on the Spanish ships and would tell about the movement of the Spanish ships. He was also, while he was in the Navy, he assisted a judge in the trial of a very famous vice admiral. Afterwards, he wanted to resign. Actually, according to the records, they didn't even want him to resign. The Navy didn't want him to resign. He was considered such a brilliant naval officer, but he did leave. He left, and he rented the room here in this particular room at the same time when William Wallace Ward was living here. He, in turn, married a girl from California whom they say was very, very wealthy. And he then, he wrote a book. He wrote a book about his experience during this Spanish-American War. And he also owned a partnership in a ship, one of the ships. Now, yes, Henrietta Heitmann actually did build them for their rent, for living here. But we have only one bill that she presented to him. And that bill was presented after their full stay of 3 years that William Wallace Ward lived here, and the 11 weeks that Henry Heber Ward lived in this house. So that she gave them a summary of the total time that they lived in this house. And the bill came to $794.90. This is called a spool bed. And it has slats, it's not a rope bed. And so this was probably built somewhere between 1850 and 1875. Now, we also look at the wallpaper. Of course, wallpaper was predominant in this house. That little piece of wallpaper in this corner was the original wallpaper in this house. It's a darker color, but we had it reproduced, and we painted and we wallpapered this house in the lighter shade of the same design. And of course, we have the silhouettes of Washington and Martha over there too, just like we had in the schoolroom downstairs. This is other people that lived in this house. This is the family of Adrian Heitmann II. Remember, Henrietta Heitmann was the daughter of Louisa Ward-Heitmann. Henrietta Heitmann had a brother, Adrian Heitmann II. Henrietta Heitmann had the schoolroom. She was only there for a few years. She left this house for her brother, Adrian Heitmann II. So he and his family lived here in this house. And we had the opportunity to learn more about Adrian Heitmann II because we received these from someone who was related to them from California. We have here Adrian Heitmann II in a uniform of the Civil War. So we know he was in the Civil War, and it said that he was wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg. And also the photograph of him was made by the famous photographer Brady. And he in turn married the woman called Adele Nival. She in turn had a daughter, and of course the daughter was named Louisa Ward-Heitmann. And now we have this photo of her and in the room, and we believe it's right here in this room that this photo was taken. We have it with her. Of course, there was a lot of pictures on the wall of decorating this wall when this picture was taken. She in turn married a Lieutenant George Gorham. It is through the Gorham relatives that we received all these pictures, so that we got to know a little bit more about Adrian Heitmann and his family and how they lived here. Well, now you'll notice that, of course, this is a Ward family, remember? And so we can't do anything with the Ward family without talking about ships, because William Wallace Ward not only was interested in the horse railroad, he, as a Ward, was interested in ships. Not only was he so interested in ships, remember he had this house built? Well, he was going to have a ship built too. And the ship was going to be called, of course, the William Wallace Ward ship. And that's the schooner. That's his schooner on that wall. It was a 4-mast schooner. They said it was one of the first 4-mast schooners that was ever built. And they say it was so big, they were afraid that at low tide, wouldn't even go under the Brooklyn Bridge. And who built this? I mean, he had it built, but where was it built? Why, right here in West Haven, Connecticut. Yes, we were a shipbuilding community. We built ships. That was launched here in 1888. It finally was destroyed in a storm off the Carolinas. But that was just one of the ships that we had built, and they were built in the Gessner and Marr shipyard right here in West Haven, Connecticut. And we have here Mr. Marr himself here. And we have also another ship that was built at the Gessner and Marr shipyard, this one. This is a very famous one. It was launched in 1891 right here in West Haven, and of course built right here in West Haven. And the story goes that when this was called the Lucinda Sutton. Mr. Sutton owned a whole fleet of ships, and his wife was named Lucinda. She came from Canada, and he named this ship after her, the Lucinda Sutton. The story about the Lucinda Sutton said that it was such a big celebration for the launching that they say 5,000 people came to West Haven just to see the launching of this ship. But the question was that something happened at the launching. They didn't realize at the time that the day they were going to launch this ship, it was low tide. And as it was going to be launched, they got stuck in the mud. But actually, then it did get out, and it was put to sail. And there's a big story that goes on with that, which was called the miracle of the Lucinda Sutton. Apparently the story goes that the Lucinda Sutton was traveling down South America and was near Argentina. And a storm came. And on board their ship, they had timber, but because of the storm, they wanted to make their ship less heavy. So what they did, they took the lumber that they had on their ship and they put it on the beach of this small town in Argentina. And the story goes that the people of that small town have been praying that they wanted to build a hotel, because they figured if they had a hotel, they would get tourists and that would help their community. But they had no lumber. And one morning when they wake up, here was on the beach all this lumber and timber, and they called it a miracle, the miracle that they could then build their hotel. But the story goes that it couldn't have been the Lucinda Sutton. That whole story is a fake, almost like fake media. But anyway, that's the big story about the Lucinda Sutton. Now, the Sutton, as I say, was a big master of fleets. It was called the Sutton Fleet, and this was one of a Sutton fleet, and actually the William Wallace Ward ship eventually became part of the Sutton Fleet. The Sutton Fleet was so popular that actually a whole book was written about them. This book was published by Mystic Seaport, and look what they put on the front cover. Of all the ships in the fleet, they chose the William Wallace Ward schooner. When we no longer had the Gessner and Marr shipyard, we still kept building. It was called the West Haven Shipping Company. And we did build, we did a lot of repairs of boats, and we did build way into the 20th century small pleasure craft boats. We go from the big schooners, we go to the steamers. Now this steamer is the Northam. This steamer went from New York to West Haven, New Haven. So in those days, if you wanted to go to New York, you just hopped onto the steamer. But this steamer was not built in West Haven. This was built in New York. And they say on the maiden voyage, 1,000 people boarded it in New York, came all the ways to West Haven or New Haven, and they left off the passengers, and that very day, that same day, in the evening, took the passengers back on and went back to New York. Now this is the Northam, and these are both all given to us by descendants of the Ward family. This particular ship has actually listing who was on it, and one of the clerks was Frederick S. Ward. And this particular ship, the Northam, had, there was another famous steamer that came here to West Haven from New York, and that was the Richard Peck. And in the story that we have of this, of the steamers, which is again was written up in a book, although the schooners were in that particular book, these are all about the steamers, and this is called the Splendor Sail of the Sound, and this too was given to us by members of the Ward family, and which would tell us about the collision of the Northam with the Richard Peck, which again was, as I say, was a steamship that one would take from West Haven to go to New York. We have one other thing that people travel with. We do not have something to show you, but as you know, New Haven was a very manufactured carriages, open carriages. Well, we do not have an open carriage to show you, but we do have something. We have this. Remember, in an open carriage, it's cold. And this is a foot warmer that was actually used in an open carriage that we have. Here you would put your hot coal, and so this would be nice and warm, and you would put it for your feet in the carriage, so you'd be nice and warm. And as I said, this was actually given to us by someone whose family actually used this in an open carriage in their travels. Well, we are going to leave this room. We're not going to leave it by a horse or by ship or by carriage. We're going to walk out of this room. This has been added to the house, but this is part of the original house. Since this has been added, first of all, this is the original wall of the house. Remember when we said in the chambers, there were no closets in those days, in the early days, but as I said, this house was always lived in. And so when other people came into the house, they built closets on both sides of the chambers. But when we took over the house, we wanted to expose this chimney. This is the master chimney of the original house that supported the 5 fireplaces. So we dismantled the closets that were built later on. And when we did that, we discovered something. We discovered because we had to lift up the floorboards here. And what did we find? We found hidden in the floorboards a pouch. In the pouch, we found these. We've had them analyzed, and we do know that they're unused British musket flints. They were British and made in England. Now, these flints were used for the guns during the Revolutionary War. And we have actually here too Later on, I'll show you one of the muskets with one of the flints in it. So the people who lived in this house at the time of the Revolutionary War were the Clarks and the Humpervilles. When Thomas Ward came into the house, it was 1788, after the Revolutionary War. This house was never touched during the Revolutionary War. And we also were able to find a buckle from a British officer here in this house. And the fact that the house was able to be purchased by Thomas Ward after the Revolutionary War, which meant that the people who lived in this house left. We believe that they must have been Tories or loyalists to the British at the time of the Revolutionary War. Also, when we were digging and exploring in this house, we did find a shoe. And this is our shoe here. It's a little child's shoe. Now, a shoe was common in those days to be hidden in floorboards and so forth. They're found in a lot of other historical homes in the early days. They said that they preserved the life of the dwelling. And this shoe is around 1800, and it's a child's shoe. It has the sole was missing, and there's a little strap next to it. And also, not only do we find a shoe, we found a shard of a Leeds pottery. And again, it was common in those days to plant a shard near the chimney, which was considered to ward off evil. And this is where you will see the flint. This would make the spark, which would be used for the firing of the bullet. Now, this particular musket, it's a military musket, and you can see how tall it is. It's as tall as I am, right? And that had to be used during the wars. This is actually an 1808 military musket. And because it has its name of the manufacturer on it, we know that this was actually made in Connecticut, and again was given to us by a person in our town. It was made in a smaller town in Connecticut, East Stillman, S-T-I-L-L-M-A-N. It was called a flintlock musket, 1808. When people lived in this house, of course, they divided it, and there were bathrooms and bedrooms and everything here. But when we took over, we decided to make this our exhibit room. So it has a rotating exhibits. Right now, for this holiday season, we've been featuring this. Was based on the tercentennial celebration of the state of Connecticut. And West Haven, as a town, had a huge celebration. Clarence Thompson, who was a president of the Board of Education, had the students in Thompson School make dioramas of life in colonial times, and they made them of the 17th century up until early 20th century for several of them. And he depicted what, let's say, for example, the kitchen